皆さん、こんにちは。本日のプレゼンテーションにご参加いただきありがとうございます。Over the next half an hour or so, I'll guide you through a selection of essential e-commerce trends and help you make sense of some of the key differences in online shopping preferences and behaviours in different parts of the world. As you've just heard, I'm Simon Kemp. Hajimemashite. Just in case you'd like to connect with me on social media, you'll find me on both LinkedIn and Twitter as Eskimon. I run a management consultancy called Kepios, which helps organisations everywhere to make sense of what people are really doing online. And a big part of our work builds on the Global Digital Report series that we produce on behalf of We Are Social and Hootsuite. If you've not seen these reports before, they provide a wealth of insights into how people in every country in the world use the internet, social media, mobile devices, and e-commerce. And best of all, we make all of these reports available completely for free over on datareportal.com. Kepios also offers a range of services to help you identify and understand the implications of the data in these reports, which is exactly what we're going to do in today's session. But the good news is that I'm not here to sell you anything today. Here's what we will be talking about in my presentation. We'll begin with a general look at the adoption and use of digital tech around the world, before taking a closer look at the adoption and use of online shopping. We'll then go on to explore e-commerce growth trends, top online shopping categories with differences by geography, how people discover and research brands and products online, the factors that encourage people to make an online purchase, and how people like to pay for their e-commerce purchases. And I'm pleased to say that we will have time for Q&A at the end of my presentation too, so please do keep a note of anything that you'd like to explore in more detail, or of any numbers that you'd like to challenge. But with that, let's dive straight into the content, starting with a quick look at the global state of digital. And the big headline in our most recent report is that there are now more than 5 billion people around the world using the internet. That means that 63% of the world's total population is now online, and marks another important milestone on our journey towards universal internet accessibility. Now, for context, internet-like networks have been around for more than 50 years now, but public adoption of connected tech only really started to gain momentum with the launch of the World Wide Web at the start of the 1990s. Global growth really accelerated over the past decade though, with roughly 3 billion people coming online between the start of 2011 and the start of 2022. The latest data show that growth has started to slow down though, with our analysis indicating that global internet users grew by a more modest 4% over the past 12 months. Growth rates do vary meaningfully by geography though, and the good news is that we're still seeing strong growth in areas where internet adoption remains below 50%, such as Central Africa and Southern Asia. However, current trends suggest that 2 in 3 people around the world will be using the internet by the middle of next year, and beyond that figure, it will become increasingly difficult to connect those people who remain offline. As a result, we expect that internet user growth rates will continue to decelerate from here on. And that means that, at least for businesses, it may be time to reconsider the metrics that we use to identify and measure digital growth. In particular, the key to unlocking future digital value will depend less on bringing more people online and more on understanding how existing users make use of connected devices and services. So that's what we're going to spend the rest of today's presentation exploring. And I'm guessing that you're particularly interested in understanding how you can unlock future e-commerce value. So let's start by exploring the global e-commerce landscape. And the encouraging news is that more than half of the world's 5 billion internet users say that they buy at least one product or service online each week. As you can see on the chart here though, that figure varies significantly by country. GWI reports that more than 2/3 of working-age internet users in Thailand make an online purchase each week, compared with barely a quarter of that cohort in Morocco. E-commerce activity also varies by age, although it's worth highlighting that internet users aged 55 to 64 are just as likely to make an online purchase each week as internet users aged 16 to 24 are. And in fact, when we look at e-commerce activity by age in different parts of the world, an even more interesting set of stories emerges. For example, internet users aged 55 to 64 across Japan, the United States, and Southeast Asia are in fact more likely than Gen Z shoppers in those same locations to make online purchases. And moreover, older generations in Southeast Asia have the highest rates of e-commerce adoption of any group in that region, although it is worth noting that overall, older age groups are less likely to be online compared with younger demographics. Furthermore, specific online shopping behaviours also vary by geography and by demographic, but not always in the ways that we might expect. For example, at a worldwide level, just over half of all the internet users who made an online purchase in the past week made at least one of their online purchases via a mobile phone. However, mobile share rises to almost 70% in South Korea, and it's also particularly high in Malaysia, Singapore, and the Philippines. But at the other end of the spectrum, most online shoppers in Ghana and Morocco make their purchases via laptop or desktop computers, despite these devices only accounting for a small share of overall internet activity in either of those countries. But one of the most surprising findings in this data is that device activity doesn't vary as much as we might expect when it comes to age. Older people are less likely to make mobile e-commerce purchases compared with younger generations, but the differences are not nearly as big as stereotypes suggest. These trends do tend to vary by geography though. For example, older internet users in Japan are considerably less likely to make online purchases via a mobile phone compared with the country's younger generations. Across Southeast Asia, however, the differences by age are only very slight, and older internet users across the region are still more likely to check out via mobile than they are to check out via a computer. But data reveals that shopping device preferences do vary considerably by product category. For example, more than 75% of all traffic to e-commerce sites selling luxury goods comes from mobile phones, whereas that figure falls below 50% for online merchants selling consumer electronics. Once again, these preferences vary by shoppers' location, age, and gender. So the essential takeaway from all this data is that merchants still need to tailor their e-commerce experiences for the specific behaviours and preferences of different kinds of customer. But what about trends in the products and services that people are actually buying? Let's start by taking a closer look at consumer goods. Just before we dive into the numbers though, it's important to clarify what we mean when we say consumer goods. And for the purposes of today's presentation, we'll focus on the following categories: consumer electronics and home appliances, fashion, accessories and footwear, home furnishings, toys, hobby products and items for home improvement, beauty, personal care and home and household care items, food and snacks, beverages, including hot beverages and alcoholic drinks, and physical media such as CDs and DVDs. And please note that physical media does not include digital downloads or streaming. Now in 2021, 3.78 billion people around the world spent a total of $3.85 trillion on online purchases of goods in those categories. And on average, that means that the typical shopper spent more than $1,000 on consumer goods e-purchases in 2021 alone. However, as you might expect, those figures for average revenue per user, or ARPU, vary significantly by country. At the top end of the scale, shoppers in Hong Kong and the United States spent more than $3,000 each on online purchases of consumer goods in 2021. However, at the other end of the spectrum, that figure fell below $100 per shopper in Nigeria. Furthermore, despite relatively high levels of adoption, consumer goods ARPU remains relatively low across much of Southeast Asia, largely due to differences in GDP per capita and the average cost of the goods themselves in comparison with other countries. But Southeast Asia's e-commerce ARPU is rising quickly. For example, while global e-commerce ARPU grew by almost 22% between 2019 and 2021, ARPU in Thailand jumped by a massive 123%, while growth rates across the rest of the region were also well above that global average. But it's not just average revenue figures that have been growing quickly. Data also shows that worldwide spend on consumer goods e-commerce purchases has surged since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. Research from Statista shows that global e-commerce spend grew by 24% during 2020 compared with 2019 levels and continued to grow at 18% per year in 2021. But it's the rapid growth of online grocery shopping that has the greatest importance for marketers. Now, for context, our analysis reveals that growth in online grocery shopping often precedes broader growth in e-commerce activity across other consumer goods categories. And there are a few different reasons for this. Firstly, grocery shopping is a high-frequency activity, with many people buying groceries on a weekly basis. And this frequency of online shopping leads to greater familiarity with online shopping environments, which in turn leads to greater comfort and confidence when it comes to buying other things online. Moreover, these frequent interactions also help to keep online channels top of mind, ensuring that e-commerce platforms enjoy greater salience. Meanwhile, one of the key findings in our latest Global Digital Report is that the number of people around the world who order groceries online each week increased by 10% during 2021. That is, during the second year of COVID. And in even more encouraging news, global online grocery spend jumped by more than 35% during the same period, despite many people being able to return to physical supermarkets. So, given the potential impact of online grocery shopping on broader e-commerce activity that we explored just a moment ago, I'm confident that these trends point towards continued strong growth across most e-commerce categories over the coming years. But how do trends in online grocery shopping compare with trends for other consumer goods categories? Let's take a closer look at what people are actually buying online. Now, at a global level, Statista reports that consumer electronics account for the largest share of online consumer goods purchases, with close to $1 trillion in worldwide spend in 2021. The fashion category ranks second, with shoppers spending more than $900 billion last year on online purchases of clothing, footwear, and accessories. Meanwhile, despite accounting for lower overall revenue, grocery saw the fastest growth across consumer goods categories last year, with spend on both food and drink increasing by more than a third in the space of just 12 months. Online purchases of beauty, personal and home care products also saw strong growth during 2021, with annual category revenues increasing by more than 20% compared with 2020 levels. However, the relative importance of each category varies considerably by geography. For example, at a global level, the consumer electronics category accounts for 1/4 of the total online spend on consumer goods, but that share rises to almost 1/3 of total spend across Southeast Asia. Meanwhile, fashion purchases account for the largest share of online spend in Japan and the United States, but the category accounts for a considerably smaller share of e-commerce spend in Southeast Asia. On the other hand, shoppers in Southeast Asia allocate a much greater share of their online spend to beauty products compared with their global peers. And lastly for this slide, groceries account for a relatively small share of Americans' online purchases compared to worldwide averages. Now, it's worth highlighting that differences in earning power and overall online spend will influence these relative share figures, but nonetheless, they still provide valuable insights into shopping priorities by region. But it's also interesting to note that the food category attracts the highest average revenue per user, at least at a global level. The typical grocery shopper spends $480 per year on online food purchases, which is 11% more than the equivalent figure for online purchases of consumer electronics. However, almost 3 times as many people make online consumer electronics purchases as make online food purchases, so both categories actually provide different and equally compelling opportunities. But talking of opportunities, how can brands and merchants capture a disproportionate share of online shoppers' spending? To find the answer to that question, let's explore the online buyer journey, starting with a look at how people discover brands, products, and services. And at a global level, data from GWI shows that search engines are the top source of brand discovery amongst the world's working age internet users, just ahead of ads on TV. Meanwhile, more than a quarter of internet users say that they've discovered a new brand, product, or service via word of mouth recommendations, ads on social media, and brand and product websites. What's particularly interesting about this data, however, is that it shows that no single channel accounts for even a third of consumers' brand discovery. And as a result, marketers and retailers should take a broad and varied approach to building brand and product awareness, including a good mix of online and offline channels. But just to reiterate that top finding, it's worth stressing that search engines remain a top source of initial brand discovery. And as a result, it's well worth considering how you can use search marketing at each step of the buyer journey, and not just for those later stage conversion activities. Meanwhile, considering that a growing share of our day-to-day communications with friends and family take place via online channels like messengers, it's clear that social media plays an exceptionally important role in the brand discovery process. Indeed, GWI's research reveals that more than a quarter of working-age internet users say that finding products to purchase is one of the primary reasons why they visit social media platforms. So, you may be encouraged to learn that at a global level, almost 60% of the world's total population now uses social media each month. Moreover, once we allow for platforms' age restrictions, we can also say that 75% of all those people who can use social media around the world already do so. Marketers also have a wide variety of social media platforms to choose from. From a pure reach perspective, a total of 7 platforms now reach 1 billion or more active users each month, while at least 17 platforms reach 300 million or more users. However, these raw user numbers can be a bit distracting, especially because the typical social media user now makes active use of 7.5 different platforms every month. And as a result, despite their impressive reach, there are huge overlaps between the audiences of all of these top platforms outside of China. Even WhatsApp, which appears to have the largest unique audience of all these top platforms, can only claim that 1.3% of its audience doesn't use any other social platform. And when it comes to platforms like Instagram and TikTok, barely 1 in every 1,000 active users is unique to the platform. But what does this data actually tell us? Well, the most important takeaway for me is that marketers can take a more strategic approach to planning their social media mix. Sure, some platforms reach a greater share of social media users, but if you can reach almost all of those users on at least one other platform, you have plenty of freedom to explore different creative opportunities and cheaper ad placements on those other platforms. But how should you decide where to prioritize your social media efforts? Well, a good place to start is affinity. And as you can see in this great data from GWI, things like total platform reach don't always correlate with actual audience preferences. For example, Facebook reports almost twice as many active users as Instagram, but the same number of people say that each platform is their favorite. Similarly, despite dominating media headlines over the past few years, fewer than 5% of working-age adults around the world say that TikTok is their favorite social platform. But that's not to say that you should ignore any of these platforms, especially those further down this ranking. For example, some of these smaller platforms may allow you to reach exactly the same individuals at a lower cost compared with those bigger platforms. And similarly, platforms like Pinterest and Discord may allow you to deliver unique content and community experiences, which may actually be better suited to your specific campaign activities. It's also worth noting that affinity for each platform varies significantly by age and gender, as well as by geography. For example, 3 times as many Gen Z women say that they prefer Instagram over Facebook, but amongst women between the ages of 35 and 44, Facebook is considerably more popular. And the good news is that you'll find loads of local preference data in our free country reports. So be sure to head over to datareportal.com if you'd like to explore those differences in more detail. But it's also important to understand the different reasons why people use each social platform. For example, research from GWI shows that messaging friends and family is the primary motivation for using Facebook, which makes it a great channel for harnessing word-of-mouth recommendations. In contrast, however, very few people use TikTok to message friends and family, with entertainment being by far the main usage motivation. As a result, marketers may want to prioritize publishing entertaining brand content on TikTok. And while we're on the subject of social media, it's also worth noting that social commerce is becoming an increasingly interesting consideration. Data published in Meta's advertising tools reveals that more than 500 million users see ads in Facebook Marketplace each month, while ads in Instagram Shop reach close to 200 million users. What's more, a recent study from Facebook and Bain revealed that more than 20% of online grocery shopping across Southeast Asia can be attributed to social commerce. And even more interestingly, anecdotal evidence suggests that a meaningful share of online grocery orders in Indonesia actually take place via messenger platforms like WhatsApp. Now, there is loads more to this social commerce story, but sadly we don't have time to explore that in any great detail today. However, perhaps the most interesting development in social media's role within the buyer journey relates to how people research brands on social platforms. Now, we'll dig deeper into social media's specific role in brand research in just a moment, but in order to make better sense of that role in context, let's first take a step back and look at overall trends in online research behaviours. Now, at a global level, more than half of working-age internet users say that they tend to research brands, products, and services online before making a purchase. Once again, though, behaviours do vary significantly by country. And perhaps surprisingly, it's the people in developing economies that are more likely to research brands online compared with people in developed markets. For example, 2/3 of internet users in the Philippines and Indonesia go online to research purchases before opening their wallets, compared with just 49% of internet users in Japan. And in another stereotype-busting finding, you may also be surprised to learn that older users are actually more likely to research purchases online than younger users are. Now, when it comes to the channels that people use to research their potential purchases, search engines once again come out top of the rankings. However, social networks rank second at the research phase, ahead of consumer reviews and brand and product websites. Now, it is worth stressing that more than 1/3 of working-age internet users still visit brand and product websites before making a purchase decision, so they continue to be an essential tool within the marketing mix. But the dominance of search and social media is worth exploring in more detail, especially because the world's search behaviours have been evolving. And there are 3 trends in this area that I particularly like to highlight: the rise of voice search, the increasing use of image recognition tools, and the critical role of social media in shoppers' research journeys. Now, for brands and merchants in Japan, these trends may come as a bit of a surprise, because these behaviours still are not widespread amongst Japanese consumers. However, the data proves that all 3 behaviours are increasingly important, especially around Asia Pacific. For starters, as you can see here, more than 30% of internet users in India now turn to voice assistants to find information each month, with the vast majority of this activity taking place on Android smartphones. Now, sadly, there's still very little information on what people are actually searching for when they use voice interfaces. However, the key thing to remember is that voice interfaces tend to return just one spoken search result, which means that the battle for the top spot in results rankings is even more important when it comes to voice search. Meanwhile, image recognition tools like Google Lens and Pinterest Lens are also gaining share in the world's search behaviours. These tools are particularly popular in Latin America, but GWI's data also reveals that they're increasingly popular across Southeast Asia and India. And this finding has particular relevance for brands and merchants in aesthetic categories like fashion, where people are considerably more likely to use an image as their search query compared with other categories. Again, there's not much data out there to help us make sense of how people are using these tools or what they're searching for. However, considering how popular they've become, especially around APAC, e-commerce brands and merchants may want to experiment with these tools to see if they can deliver some kind of competitive advantage. But as I alluded to earlier, another critically important development is social media's increasingly important role in brand research. More than 3/4 of working-age internet users now turn to social media to help them make purchase decisions, with more than 4 in 10 turning specifically to social networks. Now, as you might have come to expect by now, the picture does vary considerably by geography, and it's worth highlighting that this trend is still in its infancy in Japan. However, at the other end of the spectrum, almost 3/4 of internet users in Nigeria now turn to social media when researching things that they're considering buying, and that figure is close to 60% across Indonesia, Vietnam, and the Philippines. Social media research is particularly prevalent amongst younger users, with more than half of all female internet users between the ages of 16 and 24 saying that they rely on social networks for brand research. And indeed, Gen Z internet users are actually more likely to turn to social networking sites to research purchases than they are to use search engines. And as a result, brands and retailers need to factor these evolving social search behaviours into their broader social media marketing plans. But once people are getting closer to making a purchase decision, which factors can help tip the scales in your favour versus your competitors? Let's take a closer look at the data. And as you can see here, GWI finds that at a global level, free delivery is still by far the most important factor encouraging people to complete an online purchase, followed by some kind of discount. And the key takeaway from this data is that shoppers' perception of value is one of the most important factors driving purchase intent. But closer inspection of this data suggests that perceptions may matter more than the absolute truth. In other words, as long as shoppers feel like they're getting a good deal, they're more likely to complete their purchase. Reviews still play an important role too, though, whether those reviews are displayed on the merchant's site or the customer has found them on social media. And interestingly, once we dig into this broader data set by age and by location, we actually find many similarities. For example, free delivery and coupons and discounts also top the rankings across all age groups. However, it is worth highlighting that the relative importance of free delivery and discounts actually tends to increase with age, with older shoppers saying that they're even more motivated by good deals. But there are some more subtle nuances across these demographics as well. For example, the relative importance of product returns increases with age, while the relative importance of fast delivery decreases with age. Meanwhile, when we compare findings by location, free delivery and coupons and discounts again top the list across each of our focus geographies. But as we saw in the data by age, there are again some subtle nuances across locations. For example, based on the scores for each factor, we can deduce that Japanese shoppers are considerably less likely to be influenced by anything other than free delivery and discounts. On the other hand, Americans particularly value a quick and easy product returns process, while shoppers in Southeast Asia place greater importance on likes and comments in social media. It's also interesting to note that the option to pay cash on delivery is still a big driver across Southeast Asian countries, whereas the option to buy now, pay later is a top consideration in Japan and the United States. We'll take a closer look at payment options in the next section of today's presentation. Interestingly though, the relative influence of all these factors has been declining over the past few years. Now, that's not to say that these factors aren't important, of course, but it does mean that it's becoming increasingly difficult for merchants to use these factors to gain competitive advantage or to increase conversion rates. But while we're on the subject of conversion rates, it's worth stressing that averages vary considerably across product categories. Data from Content Square shows that merchants in the grocery and pharmaceuticals categories enjoy the highest average conversion rates, but brands in sectors like telecoms and financial services should expect to convert just a handful of customers from every 1,000 website visitors. But as I mentioned a moment ago, payment methods are still an important consideration when identifying how to improve conversion rates. So let's finish today's presentation with a look at how payment preferences vary across different shopper groups. And one of the most interesting trends that we've been tracking in e-commerce data over recent years is the rise of digital wallets. Indeed, at a global level, e-wallets are now the most widely used method of payment for e-commerce purchases, accounting for a greater share of transactions than credit cards and debit cards combined. However, bank transfers and cash on delivery still account for a meaningful share of e-commerce transactions. When we look more closely at the data by country, though, it's clear that 3 large countries, namely China, India and Indonesia, play an important role in skewing those global averages in favour of digital and mobile wallets. However, the use of e-wallets across Southeast Asia varies considerably from country to country, from a high of 39% of e-commerce transactions in Indonesia down to just 16% in Malaysia. Meanwhile, Japanese shoppers still prefer to use cards for their online purchases, with almost 6 in 10 e-commerce transactions in the country still being paid by credit card. Now, in general, credit cards are more popular across developed economies, where they already enjoy high adoption rates. And critically, data from the World Bank shows that the penetration of credit cards still remains low across many parts of Southeast Asia. Debit cards are more widespread across the region, but adoption still falls well below the global average in Indonesia, Vietnam, and the Philippines, with fewer than a third of adults in these countries saying that they possess a debit card. Meanwhile, bank transfer remains a popular method of payment for e-commerce transactions across much of Southeast Asia, with more than a third of online purchases in Thailand settled in this way. However, bank transfers are much less popular for e-commerce transactions across Northeast Asia, with Japan, South Korea, and China coming last in the rankings for use of this payment method. Buy now, pay later services have also been gaining momentum around the world over recent months, and now account for 1 in 4 transactions in Sweden and 1 in 5 in Germany. However, buy now, pay later is far less common across Asia Pacific, and WorldPay reports that barely 1% of the region's e-commerce transactions were settled via BNPL services in 2021. To finish up today's presentation, though, let's turn our attention to the potential future of payments, and more specifically to the rise of cryptocurrencies. Now, the latest global data show that roughly 1 in 9 working-age internet users now own some form of cryptocurrency. And what's more, the number of people who say that they own crypto has jumped by 40% over the past year alone. At a country level, it's interesting to note that crypto is particularly popular across Southeast Asia, in part due to the region's love affair with video games that use in-game currencies and NFTs, such as Axie Infinity. However, at a global level, crypto ownership is still heavily male-skewed, and men are roughly 60% more likely than women to own a cryptocurrency today. Moreover, constant fluctuations in the value of currencies like Bitcoin and Ether, and the recent collapse of the Terra USD stablecoin, mean that digital currencies still have a long way to go before they become a practical choice for most mainstream merchants. However, given the rapid rise in crypto ownership, especially around APAC, it seems likely that it will only be a matter of time before some form of crypto goes mainstream. So I'd recommend reviewing the potential for accepting cryptocurrencies every 6 months or so. Now, sadly, that's all I've got time for in today's presentation, especially because I'd like to leave time for your questions. And here's a quick recap of the topics that I've covered today to help remind you of any questions that you'd like to ask me. Just while you're getting those questions ready, remember that you can find all of the data that I've shared today, and all for free, over on datareportal.com. If you'd like more personalised help to understand what all these numbers might mean for you, do head over to kepios.com, where you'll be able to find details of our private briefings and custom research projects. And just in case you'd like to stay in touch with me or ask me a question after today's session, please do connect with me on social media. I would be very happy to hear from you. But with that, I'll hand things back over to you to start our Q&A.